Welcome everybody. It's great to see such a good turnout and nice to see some colleagues and former students here. So thank you very much for coming. The first thing
microphone or
can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a tendency because I'm Irish. I tend to mumble, and I also tend to speed up as I talk. So if I start sounding like the commentator from the Derby, you stop me and repeat. I'll repeat myself. Okay. It's something I'm aware of, so please haul me up on it.
And I will give you a sign 5 minutes before the end.
Okay. So, as Emmanuel said, I'm an artist and I'm a senior lecturer here at UCA Farnham in the School of Further Education. And what I'll be talking about today is about the book that I've been making over the past year with the Book Room. It's funded by a research fund for the School of Further Education, which I was successful in acquiring funds for about a year ago, 18 months ago. But prior to talking about the actual book, my intention is to talk about a bit of a background about my own practice and a bit of background about the work that the book catalogues. So I initially studied photography in the university, in Dunleary Institute of Art and Design in Dublin, in Ireland, and then in the University of Westminster in London. But over the course of the last 10 years, my practice has gradually diversified and become much more multidisciplinary. Having said that, photography is at the heart of what I do. It's very often the first medium I turn my hand to when I'm working on a new idea, but it's not necessarily always the medium that is utilised at the end or as part of the process. Over the course of the last year, thanks to my engagement with the Book Room and a number of the things that have been taking place in my practice outside of here, I've gained a deeper understanding of the underlying concerns that my practice is concerned with or interested in. And they are resistance and protest against structures and systems, both public and private, that we find ourselves operating within and engaging with, and the sense of frustration the individual feels while butting up against these systems and structures. The methodology that my work utilises, very often it consists of a singular act or action that's carried out. It's repetitive in nature and involves routine. And often durational. So the video you're looking here is a durational piece documenting one of the drawings being made, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but each drawing takes between 10 and 12 hours of continuous pen pushing in order to waste all the ink in the individual pen. As yet, my work is performative in that respect, but as yet the performance has not been offered up to the viewer, just the residue of the action. Although that might change with work I'm hoping to make in the next year or so. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Good. There we go. So this is a piece of work I just wanted to show you, just to give a bit of context to what I do as a practitioner. This is quite early work. This is 2002. And it's called Euro Nation. And it was made the year after the euro was introduced into Ireland. So the work actually involved me going out in the dead of night and painting postboxes blue, which is the European colour, as a comment on the homogenisation of individual EU states in the European Union. And it was the first interventionist and subversive act that I'd carried out against a structure or a system. I have actually done them in the UK, actually outside UCA Epsom a long time ago as well. Another piece of work, just to give a bit more context, was a perambulation or a walk, a solo walk across Ireland, so from the most southerly point to the most northerly point without passing a pub. The walk was inspired by a misquote, which is used by different arms of Tourist Ireland to promote Ireland. And the misquote was from Ulysses, which read, "A good puzzle would be cross Ireland without passing a pub." So I wanted to test that definition, or a definition of the Ireland and the Irish, by carrying out this nonsensical action. So getting back to the work, During the height of the recession, like many other people, I found myself in debt as a result of studying. And while I was in one of the high street banks, waiting to talk to somebody about an overdraft, I think it was, I picked up one of the complimentary pens that they had there. I didn't really pay much attention to it at the start until later on when I was at home working out my incomings and outgoings and trying to find a strategy for getting myself actually out of debt. And I noticed that on the spine of the pen it had printed borrowed from my bank. So I decided to see how much ink I could borrow from my bank and see how far I could stretch it. I feel very much that this piece of work was ready-made. It was a gauntlet sent down by the bank themselves because they have actually produced a whole series of these pens, which was quite interesting. And the slogans are quite interesting. I've got some of them coming up in a moment. So that's the pen used, and this is one of the drawings. As I said, it takes between 10 to 12 hours to waste all the ink in an individual pen. And that's just a detail. One of the works. Here are some of the images of the other pens. They have a range of pens, and they seem to make light of the current financial situation, with slogans that alluded to this idea that credit was easy and everybody should have it, and if you want to buy a TV, get a loan and pay for it and worry about it later. Which to me seemed quite irresponsible considering the situation globally at the time. And coincidentally, this particular bank was the only bank that didn't actually receive a bailout by the British government. So perhaps, maybe that's the reason. So Take Me I'm Yours, or Unlimited Edition, there's always more where that came from. So the economic climate, frivolous lending practices, easy credit culture, borrowing to fund desired lifestyles. There's always more, no matter what your income is, you can get more. An impulsive nature to buying and spending, which actually led up to and was in part caused the credit crisis or the recession, or what now is known as the Great Recession. So as the work progressed, I decided to widen my collection of pens because I felt that those Barclays pens needed to be collected and archived as a record, as a statement about their kind of outlook on what was going on at the time, and given what had happened previously. But I decided to start collecting pens from other financial institutions because I wanted the work not just to be about one bank, but about the wider issues that surrounded the global crisis and each of the individual banks' role in the recession, and also our role in the recession as well. We were all borrowing too much to fund our lifestyles. I also started to look at how banks and financial institutions how they communicate visually, the visual language they utilize, how economic data is presented to the ordinary Joe Soap. So I started to incorporate graphs that were related to the financial institution the pen was from. So for example, this one here is the average house price in the UK over the 10 years leading up to the recession. And the pen that was used to make that drawing was Halifax, and Halifax is the biggest mortgage provider in the UK. This one is a HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. So the big circle, I don't know if you can see it, is what HSBC was worth in the first quarter, or the second quarter of 2007, and that's how much they were worth in the first quarter of 2009. So you can actually see visually how much the recession affected them at the time. They've since recovered quite well though. And as the collection widened, I started to notice the difference in the quality of the pens that I was getting from different banks and the materials they were used from. And then for me, that was a comment on how the bank wanted to represent themselves to their customers and the outside world, and also the types of customers they wanted to actually attract to their institution. So this one is very close to my heart. This is my personal debt leading up to when the work was actually made. And the pen that was used was from the bank that I owed the money to. It was a lot easier getting their money than getting that pen off them, I have to say. I think eventually the only reason I got it is because I had to have a meeting with one of the managers, and he actually had one on his desk. And despite repeated attempts through letter writing and phone calls, they weren't forthcoming. In fact, they told me they didn't make them. But anyway, I got one in the end. This is JP Morgan. And the graph depicts their purchasing rate. So you can see that there was a drastic decline in the amount of assets they were actually acquiring following the recession. Okay. A massive dip. And again, here is the pen that is used. And just to give you a bit of a contextual framework, so you can see how I view my work, or the sphere I view my work within. This is a piece of work by Francis Elise, very interesting artist. It's called Sometimes Making Something Leads to Nothing. It involved him pushing this massive block of ice through the streets of Mexico City until the block of ice completely evaporated and wore away. And how that relates to what I was doing is this idea of using something continually until it runs out, and also a durational act. Another a reference is the art and language movement, which is a British conceptual, I think it was British as far as I know, conceptual art movement in the late 60s, early 70s. And this is hardcore conceptualism, at the interrogation of an idea at the expense of the aesthetics. I don't actually think they actually made anything. All they did was write down their ideas and present the written descriptions of what the work would be on the wall. And for me, the actual work itself, it was hardcore conceptualism, because it was this act at the expense of aesthetics, continuous use of these pens until all the ink had dried out. Another one, and I won't be able to pronounce this, if anybody else wants to correct me, you're more than welcome, is a Morales Sildo, and this was insertions into ideological circuits. The reason why I've included this is because it's subversive, and it's utilizing an institution's property to open up a critical debate. So what this individual did, they screen printed a number of subversive messages onto Coca-Cola bottles, which were then put back into the recycling system. And then when they were filled back up with the product, then these subversive messages were apparent. So on this one here, there's actually a recipe for a Molotov cocktail. So now getting back to the actual book. In 2010, I started making a book myself. The maquette is there on the table, as are the various different maquettes I've made since. And the reason why I started working on a book is because it felt like a natural resolution to the actual work itself that I spent quite a lot of time on. And I decided I wanted to subvert the visual language that the banks use in another way with the book, by appropriating the style of the kind of leaflets and annual reports that they actually publish and disseminate to shareholders and also customers themselves. So this is just primary research. They're on the table as well. So the style of the book was borrowed from a number of different publications from a few different banks. Because all these publications, they're all very clean, they're all very white, they're all very calm, they're all not very serious. It's non-authoritative language. Because they want you to borrow money from them all. Sans serif typefaces, so everything's not too serious, not like the Times. Tell me if I'm going too fast. And just as an aside, while I was researching, going through my archive for this presentation, I actually came across this. And it was an idea that was floating around in my head. I was actually going to try and find images where public had lashed out against the banks during the crisis, and then try and replicate those press images using the pens that I'd borrowed, which I didn't end up doing, but funnily enough, that alludes to where I'm going with my work next, what I'm going to work on next, this idea of people lashing out in public spaces out of frustration. Bit of a sketchbook page, because we all have to have sketchbooks, to contain our thoughts, for us to think, try things out. In here I was exploring, again, graphs and thinking about how perhaps drawings could transcend beyond one page and over multiple pages and making up a whole image. So that is the maquette, the cover of the maquette that I had in 2010 and that I brought with me to my first meeting with Emmanuel. It was very rough, very rough. And the reason why I kind of left it, I'm getting better at this now, but I was kind of quite bad at it. Works would become orphan. Something would happen, another opportunity would present itself, an exhibition or a publication or something, and I'd lose interest in it. I'd focus my attention on something else, and then this orphan work would just get locked away in a filing cabinet and not touched, okay? So I've made it my aim to try and resolve these orphan works, which this book was one of. So then, I've been working with the book room for the past year. The book isn't finished. It's very nearly finished, so this is an opportunity. If you have any feedback, please give it to me. I'd be very welcome to hear it. The most recent maquette is the one with the shiny cover in the bottom right-hand corner of the table. 5 minutes, okay. So what I was interested in the book is the idea of disseminating the work and also the idea of engaging people through a non-art object because it looks like something that's familiar that you might have seen before. Another maquette, through various different discussions with Emmanuel and Sam and Richard, the book became more and more refined. One of the things about the book that I could do, with the book, that I couldn't do with the work, was provide quite a lot of contextual information about the role of the banks, their history, the role in the history of the financial services industry, their contribution to popular culture, their role in the recession, and what has happened with them since, okay? With the book, I can do that. So in the book, quite a large section of the back of the book is this contextual information, which is there for the viewer or the reader. If they want to be more informed, they can read it. And I've also attempted to try and demystify some of the financial language that is used by banks, which makes the whole financial sector seem quite intimidating. And makes the financial sector feel like that. When I think of finance and banks and the stock market, it just seems like this impenetrable wall that I can't get through. I'm just going to show you the PDF of where it's at the moment and talk about a few different things, and then I'll be finished. So yeah, I'll just flick through a few pages. It's borrowed the style of those publications quite heavily. These colours here, they are the average colour that each of these financial institutions use in their brand identity. And that's a theme that's carried through the whole publication, and also used at the back where there's quite a lot of text to try and break it up visually as well, and also to highlight which sections of the text relate to different financial institutions. What I like about the publication as it is, on the face of it, when you first look at it, it does look like an annual report from a financial institution. But then as you start to peer into it a bit more, you come across these rather ambiguous drawings, which you don't know what to make sense of. And then also you start to come across the pens, which they're not, while they're photographed in a high-key fashion, as products would be photographed for catalogues, they're actually broken, used, and there are marks of use on them. So it's tearing a hole in that simulation of this perfect veneer that these financial reports often present. One other thing that the book allowed me to do that the work itself didn't was to provide additional commentary about the work as the publication progresses. I'm just going to scroll down a bit more. So the top image here, this is when I really knew the recession was kicking in. This is Northern Rock share price leading up from July until September, I think it was the 7th of 2007, when the first bank run in 150 years took place, and over £2 billion worth of sterling was taken out by customers within 2 days, and resulted in Northern Rock being nationalised and a variety of other institutions being nationalised. If I can just scroll down. I just want to show you the terms and conditions at the back. So again, the information, the contextual information that I've included to give a background or historical background about each of these institutions' contribution to society, and also their contribution to the recession and what's happened since, is contained here as terms and conditions. It's deliberately small, it's deliberately dense, because the terms and conditions, all the real legal stuff, when you sign up for a loan, all that stuff at the back of the page, I've tried to replicate that in this section of the book, and also provide some of the images that I've actually used as primary research material in the making of some of the actual drawings themselves. And that's it. All I'd just like to add, well, before I finish up, I'd like to thank the book room and Emmanuel, Richard and Sam, because I've worked here for 8 years, and I'm a youngish, I look younger than I am, practitioner and academic. My experience with the book room, this is the first real experience I've had of a research culture within this institution, and I'm really thankful of that, because it's really informed my work. The book room should be commended because, not just for encouraging people to actually research and produce work, but they actively promote UCA and the book room beyond the confines of our campuses. They go to fairs, they produce publications, they run conferences and seminars, and that is something that they really should be commended for, and I hope it continues. Thank you very much for listening.